Chapter 1. First Contact. Dr. Eleanor Mitchell had spent 30 years studying the human olfactory system. At 62, she'd thought nothing could surprise her anymore about the complexity of smell. Then the Var'rx arrived. They looked almost human, if humans had been made of shifting patterns of light beneath translucent skin. Their civilization was centuries ahead of Earth's, with technology that seemed like magic, but they couldn't smell a thing. The first time Ambassador Talara visited Ellie's lab at the University of Vermont, the alien literally couldn't understand why humans kept wrinkling their faces and moving their nostrils. These involuntary muscle movements, Talara had said, her skin flickering with patterns that indicated scientific curiosity. They serve no purpose we can detect. Ellie had reached for the nearest thing she could find to demonstrate, a jar of fresh coffee beans. The rich aroma filled the lab as she opened it. Her graduate students sighed appreciatively, but Talara showed no reaction. "We're detecting no changes in air composition that would warrant a response," Talara said, her crystalline monitoring devices hovering around her. "Yet your entire team's physiological readings just altered significantly." That was the moment Ellie realized that humanity, despite being centuries behind the Var'rx in nearly every way, possessed something extraordinary that their advanced visitors couldn't comprehend. Chapter 2. The Learning Curve. 6 months later, Ellie's lab had become the primary research center for human Var'rx sensory studies. The aliens were fascinated by humanity's ability to detect thousands of different chemical compounds with nothing more than their natural biological equipment. "You mean to tell me," senior researcher Zatal said one autumn morning, his skin pulsing with disbelief patterns, "that you can identify the approaching weather systems simply by sensing changes in air pressure and atmospheric composition?" Ellie smiled, breathing in the crisp Vermont air. "Smells like snow," she said simply, "and Mrs. Henderson next door is baking apple pie again." The Var'rx found it particularly baffling that humans could navigate and survive using what they termed primitive chemical detection. Their own civilization had developed complex technological solutions for everything that human noses did naturally. "But how do you know if food has spoiled?" junior researcher Var'rx had asked during one session. "We smell it," Ellie's assistant Tom had replied with a shrug. "And toxins in the air? Smell those too. Mate selection?" That had led to an awkward but fascinating discussion about pheromones and perfumes that left the Var'rx researchers glowing with embarrassment patterns. Chapter 3. The Mission. When the Var'rx proposed a joint scientific mission to study a newly discovered Earth-like planet, Ellie hadn't expected to be included. At her age, she figured her role would be limited to consulting from Earth, but the aliens specifically requested her presence. "Your primitive sensory capabilities may provide unique insights," High Commander Zara had said, meaning it as a compliment. The ship was a marvel of Var'rx technology, a crystalline structure that seemed to flow through space itself. Ellie and 3 other human scientists, Tom Wheeler, Dr. Maria Santos, and Dr. James Chen, found themselves aboard with a crew of 12 Var'rx researchers. Their destination was HD 472C, dubbed New Vermont by the human team for its similar size and composition to Earth. Initial probes had shown potential for life, but the Var'rx instruments were giving contradictory readings. As they approached the planet after 6 months of travel, Ellie stood at the ship's observation dome with Talara, who had become something of a friend despite their physiological differences. "Our sensors indicate habitability," Talara said, her skin showing uncertainty patterns. "But something feels incorrect." Ellie smiled at the aliens' use of the word feels. They'd been picking up human expressions over the months of close contact. "Sometimes," she said, "you need more than just sensors to understand a world." Neither of them knew then just how prophetic those words would prove to be. Chapter 4. Planetfall. The landing site looked perfect on scans, a vast plain near the equator with Earth-like gravity and atmospheric pressure. The Var'rx instruments showed optimal conditions, but the moment the airlock opened, Ellie's nose told her something was wrong. "Wait," she called out, but Var'rx had already stepped onto the surface. The young Var'rx researcher suddenly collapsed. their crystalline monitoring devices going haywire. "Close the airlock," Ellie shouted. There's something in it, something sweet like almonds." "Our instruments detect no toxins," Zatal said, but he was already pulling Var'rx back inside. "Cyanide," Tom said grimly, checking his handheld analyzer. "Low concentrations, but it's there, mixed with something else, masking it from the Var'rx sensors." The rescue mission had suddenly become something else entirely. The Var'rx's advanced technology had failed to detect a basic poison that any human nose could identify. But that was just the beginning of their problems. A massive storm system appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, grounding their ship. Key systems began failing, affected by something in the planet's environment that the Var'rx instruments couldn't identify. Within hours, the crew found themselves stranded. As night fell on HD 472C, Ellie stood with Talara in the ship's damaged control room, watching the alien weather patterns through reinforced windows. The wind carried scents that made her increasingly uneasy chemical signatures she'd never encountered before, mixing and shifting in ways that defied her 30 years of experience. "We may have made a significant miscalculation," Talara said, her skin patterns showing deep concern. "Perhaps we should have given more weight to your primitive capabilities." Ellie nodded, sniffing the air coming through the filtration system. "The good news is those primitive capabilities might be exactly what we need to survive this place." Outside, something moved in the darkness, something that had evolved on a world of poison and deception, where smell wasn't just a sense, it was a weapon. And the only hope for their survival lay in the very human ability that the Var'rx had dismissed as obsolete. Chapter 5. The Night Hunters. The first attack came at midnight. "They're using scent to communicate," Ellie said, her nose twitching as she analyzed the changing chemical signatures in the air. "Like ants, but more complex, they're coordinating." Through the ship's damaged viewport, they watched as creatures that looked like a cross between Earth's praying mantises and chameleons emerged from the darkness. Their bodies released clouds of chemical signals that the Var'rx sensors registered as simple atmospheric disturbances. But to the human nose, it was like listening to a conversation. "They're hunting," Maria Santos said, her years of experience as a wildlife biologist evident in her voice. "The sweet almond smell is just the beginning. They use different scents to herd prey into toxic areas." Talara's skin flickered with distress patterns. "Our defensive systems are not designed to track chemical signatures of this complexity. We are blind." "Then it's a good thing you've got some primitive humans around," Tom said, already rigging up a makeshift vapor detection system using equipment from Ellie's lab. Chapter 6. Adaptation. Over the next few days, the humans became the Var'rx's lifeline. Every excursion outside the ship had to be led by a human nose. They learned the hard way that the planet's entire ecosystem was based on chemical warfare and deception. "It's like everything evolved to trick conventional sensors," James Chen said, as he analyzed samples in the ship's lab. "The plants, the animals, they all use complex chemical combinations to hide, hunt, or defend themselves. The Var'rx, humbled by their technological inadequacy, proved to be quick students. Unable to smell themselves, they learned to trust their human companions implicitly. When Ellie said an area was dangerous, they no longer questioned it with their instruments. Talara spent hours with Ellie, learning to correlate the human scent descriptions with subtle changes in atmospheric readings. "Describe it again," she would say. "This rotting smell you mentioned. How is it different from decay?" Chapter 7. The Discovery. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Maria Santos had been mapping the relationship between different scent signatures when she noticed a pattern. "The whole planet is like a giant chemical computer," she explained to the gathered crew. "The organisms aren't just communicating, they're part of a vast network, sharing information through scent markers." This was something the Var'rx could understand. Their own civilization was built on networks and information exchange, but they'd never encountered a biological system of this complexity. "If we can decode it," Talara said, her skin showing excitement patterns for the first time since the crash, "we might be able to predict the creature's movements, perhaps even communicate with them." Ellie spent the next week working with Talara to create a hybrid system, part human olfactory knowledge, part Var'rx technology. They called it the artificial nose, though it was really more of a translator between human sensory experience and Var'rx data processing. Chapter 8. The Message. When they finally broke the chemical code, it wasn't what anyone expected. The scent signals weren't just about hunting or defense. They carried complex information about weather patterns, resource locations, and even abstract concepts. It's like they've developed an entire language out of smell, Ellie explained. More sophisticated than anything we've encountered on Earth. Using their hybrid system, they began to communicate with the planet's organisms. The attacks stopped. The creatures, it seemed, had been defending themselves against what they perceived as a scentless and therefore untrustworthy invasion. It represented an entirely new way of understanding and interacting with biological systems. Perhaps, High Commander Zara said during the debriefing, we have been too quick to dismiss biological solutions in favor of technological ones. There is wisdom in what we once considered primitive. Chapter 10. Evolution. 1 year later, Ellie stood in her lab at the University of Vermont, now expanded and filled with both human and Var'rx researchers. The walls were lined with chemical detection equipment that combined the best of both worlds, human sensory understanding and Var'rx technological precision. Talara, now the head of the joint Human Var'rx Sensory Research Initiative, worked at a nearby station. Her skin showed patterns that Ellie had learned to read as contentment. We received the latest data from New Vermont, Talara said. The chemical communication network extends across the entire planet. It may be the most sophisticated information system we've ever encountered. Ellie nodded, opening a jar of coffee beans, a gesture that had become something of a tradition between them. Talara's sensors now registered the chemical components in ways that corresponded to human descriptions of the aroma. You know what this means, don't you? Ellie said with a smile. Humans aren't the only ones who needed to evolve. Sometimes technology needs to take a step backward to move forward. Talara's skin flickered with what Ellie now recognized as amusement. Indeed, though perhaps it's not about backward or forward at all. Perhaps it's about learning to value all forms of perception, even those we once considered primitive. Outside, the Vermont autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. To the human nose, it smelled like home. To the Var'rx sensors, it registered as a complex tapestry of chemical signatures. But now, finally, both species were learning to appreciate the same thing in their own ways. The universe, they had discovered, had many ways of speaking. Sometimes you just needed to learn how to listen, or in this case, how to smell. Dear fellow science fiction enthusiasts, if you enjoyed the scent of home, please consider taking a moment to share your thoughts. As a writer dedicated to crafting stories for our community, your feedback helps shape future narratives. Eleanor Mitchell's experience-based wisdom? What other primitive human senses would you like to see explored in future stories? Have you ever been in a situation where your instincts proved more reliable than technology? Don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you. Share it with fellow sci-fi readers who appreciate thoughtful exploration of human potential. Subscribe to receive notifications about upcoming stories in this series. Join our monthly science fiction book club where we discuss similar themes. Coming soon, The Sound of Stars, a new story exploring humanity's unique relationship with music in a galaxy of silent species. Remember, your engagement helps support independent science fiction writing and ensures more stories that celebrate human ingenuity and wisdom. Thank you for being part of our growing community of mature science fiction enthusiasts.